Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Yashodanandana Pradajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Pradajana Ranjana Yamuna Tiro Vanachari Yamuna Tiro Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Gopijana Vallabha Girivaradhari Yashodanandana Vrajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Vrajana Ranjana Yamuna Tiro Vanachari Yamuna Tiro Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Paramahansa Paribhajaracharya Sukhareshwar Smala Vitam Jaya Ananda Kori Vaishnava Ki Jaya Ramacharya Sri Haridas Thakur Ki Jaya Thank you the whole Sri Krishna Radha Krishna Gopala Sam Kanda Radha Krishna वृंदावन धाम की जय नवदीप धाम की जय गंगा माई की जय यमुना माई की जय द्वारका धाम की जय स्वामी भक्तवृंद की जय और ग्लोरी टू और ग्लोरी टू थैंक यू वेरी मच
Hare Krishna, everybody.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Okay, so it's 5:03. I think we can get started. I tried rescheduling the meeting invite. That's the only way in the past we have been able to fix the chat issue. Can somebody check and confirm if the chat's working right now?
I don't see the chat option.
Okay, so maybe this is beyond me now. This is the only way we have solved this problem in the past. We just cancel the series and then resend it, but looks like it's a bigger issue. Okay, I don't know, we'll keep working on it. Meanwhile, you can, as always, feel free to interrupt me or send a message on WhatsApp. By the way, I've been using the camera app as a mirror, and then it seems they have this new feature where they have the square sort of zooming in. It's like face detection, And there is no option to turn it off. So I'm not sure if that bothers you when you're watching, but it's checking some forums on Microsoft and it looks like there's no way to turn this feature off. So you might have to just bear with that. Okay, so having said that, I think we can get started as usual. If anyone would like to share something, any questions, comments, doubts from previous session before we begin. Okay, if not, I can get started. So last class we spent a lot of time just discussing this one verse, and that was worth it. Again, there's a lot in this particular verse, and I think it's time well spent. So we'll continue to move on. I believe I did not get a chance to read the purport. So what I'll do is I'll go over some of the important points in the purport, and then we can continue with the next verse. So this is Bhagavad Gita, 2nd chapter, 13th verse. Dehinosmin yatha dehe kaumaram yovanam jara tatha dehantara praptir dhirastatra na muhyati. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation: as the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul similarly passes into another body at death. A sober person is not bewildered by such a change. Purport: since every living entity is an individual soul, each is changing his body every moment, manifesting sometimes as a child, sometimes as a youth, and sometimes as an old man. Yet the same spirit soul is there and does not undergo any change. So we discussed this last time in detail. This individual soul finally changes the body at death and transmigrates to another body. And since it is sure to have another body in the next birth, either material or spiritual, there was no cause for lamentation by Arjuna on the account of death, neither for Bhishma nor for Drona, for whom he was so much concerned. Rather, he should rejoice for the changing bodies from old to new ones, thereby rejuvenating their energy. Such changes of body account for varieties of enjoyment or suffering according to one's work in life. So there was this question, why the bodies need to change, and then and when they change, why do we forget our previous life? So this is basically new body means new set of privileges and restrictions which enable enjoyment or suffering, mostly a combination of both, to basically allow for our desires to be fulfilled from previous lives or previous karma, and at the same time enjoy or suffer according to our karma. So Bhishma and Drona, being noble souls, we're surely going to have spiritual bodies in the next life, or at least in the heavenly bodies for superior enjoyment of material existence. So Arjuna might question, okay, this body will end and the new body will, it's like rejuvenating of energy, but then the new body could bring suffering or could bring enjoyment. But then here it is being specified, well, at least in case of Bhishma and Drona, we can say that because they were noble souls, they would achieve liberation, and if not liberation, so Bhishma being a pure devotee of the Lord, it's and he left the body on the day of Uttarayan, an auspicious time, right in the front of Krishna, as personally present. So as we will see later, he definitely achieves the spiritual destination. And Drona also being a noble soul, even if he does not achieve spiritual perfection, he is at least entitled to a better destination in heavenly planets. So in either case, there was no cause of lamentation. Any man who has perfect knowledge of the constitution of the individual soul, the super soul, and nature, both material and spiritual, is called a dhira, or a most sober man. So dhira means stable. Literally, that's what it means here. Srila Prabhupada translates it as a sober man. So if you look at the literal translation, stable means a person is not disturbed, is not overwhelmed when there is misery or when there is suffering, and at the same time that the dhira is not super excited and super elated when the conditions are very favorable or so. Sober men is sober me also. So what is stable has to do with sober. In one meaning of sober, we say that person is sober when one is not intoxicated, and um, we see that when people achieve some success or some reputation, fame, unless they are properly trained, they tend to get carried away by it, right? And so as if they are like intoxicated by their achievements or successes. But the sober man is not intoxicated, and a sober man understands that both are temporary, either suffering or enjoyment. So such a man is never deluded by the change of the bodies, because different bodies, when they change, they bring a different set of enjoyments or sufferings or combination of the both, mostly, right? That is the understanding. So yeah, the message that essentially Krishna is trying to give to Arjuna, well, you are lamenting for the death of the body, and which in a way at one level it is natural, but that should not be an excuse for you to not do your duty. That's the main point. Yeah, so we discussed that. Now the Mayavadi theory of oneness of spirit soul cannot be entertained on the ground that spirit soul cannot be cut into pieces as a fragmental portion. What does that mean? So we actually touched this topic in some of the previous sessions, but we see this word again comes up multiple times. So there was a question in one of the classes earlier, and not all of you might be present at the time. And since this topic came up again, I think it's worth elaborating on that. So there is this idea of what we call in English impersonalism. And so there are two philosophies within. So if you look at the Hindu theology, what is called a Hindu theology in around the world, or you call it the Vedic worldview, if you don't use the word Hindu, there are theistic philosophies and there are atheistic philosophies, right? And some of the atheistic philosophies is, one of them is Charvak, and we quoted that sloka from Charvak, which he says, Yavat jivet labo jivet rinam kritva ghritam pibet. As long as you live, you take that and but eat and drink ghee. Once we are dead, everything ends. So why bother about afterlife? So that's atheism, right? But then so that philosophy is also there. I mean, atheism is not a new concept. The idea always existed. But then within the theistic branch, there are two sub branches, which is the idea that if the absolute truth is a person, which is what the Vaishnavas adhere to. And then there is the idea that absolute truth is impersonal. Now, when the Vaishnavas say that the absolute truth is a person, it's not that they do not agree with the idea that the impersonal aspect of the Lord does not exist. It is accepted, Vaishnavas accepted that the impersonal aspect of the Lord is there, but that is not the absolute truth. The base is, later in Bhagavad Gita we'll see, Krishna says, Brahman eva hi pratishthitam. I believe that's what it says. So what it means is that I am the basis or the foundation of the Brahman. So the Brahman is what the impersonalists, they consider as the absolute truth. Just like we gave the example, sunlight. So if we are in the room, even if you don't go out and look at the window, we see there's light inside the room, right? Now that light is not a person, we cannot perceive it. But so that is accepted. There is no denial that there is no light, right? The impersonal energy is accepted. But as soon as you talk about energy, there should be someone who is energetic. So the impersonalists, they do not have idea or information about the source of that Brahman. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, I am the source of the Brahman. So Vaishnavas are not denying that the impersonal aspect of the Lord does not exist. What they are saying is that beyond that there is a source of the impersonal aspect of is a feature is actually an attribute of a person, and that's the only distinction. So the Vaishnavas are of primarily four sampradayas of Vaishnavas exist. We talked about that earlier. You have Sri Sampradaya from Lakshmi Ramanujacharya appeared. Then you have the Brahma Sampradaya, so the Gaudiya Vaishnavas, parampara of Srila Prabhupada, who comes in that parampara, comes from Brahma Madhva Gaudiya. And there is a Kumara Sampradaya, the four Kumaras who are the sons of Brahma. There was another Sampradaya that was started from them. And then there is Rudra Sampradaya coming from Lord Shiva himself. And in the impersonal philosophy also there are two branches. One is Mayavad and another is Brahmavad. So the Brahmavad, Brahmavad is more neutral, and the Vaishnavas do not have any direct conflict against Brahmavad, because the Vaishnava philosophy entails Brahman, because they understand that Brahman is there, and that Brahman is a feature of the Lord. The Brahmavadis is that they don't have the idea of the personality of the Lord. But then there are other kind of impersonalists, which are Mayavadis. And this is the point of contention. Like somebody was asking other day, why is, there's always, you will find the idea of Mayavad comes up, and then Srila Prabhupada will see in his purports, he's refuting that idea again and again. So somebody might question. The thing with Mayavad is it's a different kind of impersonalism. Unlike Brahmavadis, the Brahmavadis, they do not deny the personal form of the Lord. It's just that they don't have any information. You can think of them as an agnostic, in the sense that they are not against the form of the Lord, but you just don't have information about the form of the Lord. The Mayavadis, on the other hand, they deny the form of the Lord. So they have a more strong stance that the Lord does not, the absolute truth does not have a form. And when the Lord appears on this earth, actually Lord is also subject to Maya. He assumes a form which is a material form, which is also and he is also subjected to illusion, just like we are. And by his dint, he achieved perfection, he achieved liberation, and emerged into nothingness, or the light, the Brahman light, which is the effulgent light. And similarly, we can also achieve that perfection. And that idea of perfection is that we lose our identity, right? The Brahmavadis are not saying that we lose our identity. They are saying that, okay, the identity is retained. But that identity, how it is retained? It is retained as a particle in the which is floating in the light of the Brahman. The soul actually is floating, just like sunlight is there, but the sunlight, it appears like a homogeneous entity, but it's not homogeneous. It comprises of different photons. Similarly, water, when you say it appears, water all appears homogeneous, but a body of water like ocean or river, but we see that though it appears homogeneous, it does comprise of many molecules of water itself. So that is the difference between Brahmavad and Mayavad. So when Prabhupada is commenting on Mayavadi theories, is specifically referring to the Mayavad sub-branch of impersonalism. Otherwise, if you look at Sukadeva Goswami, who is the son of Vyasdev, who spoke Srimad Bhagavatam, he was a Brahmavadi earlier. He was not a Mayavadi, but he was Brahmavadi, means he accepted the impersonal form of the Lord. He just did not have information about the personality of Godhead, but he learned that from his father, Sri Vyasdev. And when he read about all the glories, he was so excited. He was so filled with love and emotion, and so he became, he regained his original form of a Vaishnava. Similarly, the four Kumaras, who are Vaishnavas, right? There's an entire sampradaya coming from four Kumaras. They were also Brahmavadis. They only had the idea of the impersonal aspect of the Lord, but they were not against it. They were not Mayavadis. So anyway, I had posted earlier, I think it was the very first or second session of the Bhagavad Gita classes, where there were questions on Lord Shiva. And then I had posted an article in Medium. If you're not read it, I recommend you go and read it. But in that, I have provided the history of how Lord Shiva, though himself is a Vaishnava, he appeared as Sankaracharya to fulfill the purpose. This is stated in Padma Puran, that he wanted to differentiate between devotees and non-devotees. So in order to do that, he came by using grammatical gimmicks. He came up with, misinterpretations of the Vedic text to prove that the form of the Lord is illusory. So he does that, and then that the Mayavad idea, though it always existed, he gave structure to it, and then a lot of people took up that philosophy. Now, question is, why did he do that? So there are two reasons. One is the beginning of Kali Yuga. The Vedas were getting misinterpreted in the sense, the Brahmanas, what they did, they started doing animal sacrifice was there in the past, but in the previous ages, by the power of mantra, when they do animal sacrifice, generally it's an old animal that is slaughtered, and by the dint of their chanting of the mantras, at the end of the sacrifice, that old animal is again rejuvenated and brought back to life, and in a younger body. But as Kali Yuga began, the Brahmanas, they lost their power. They could recite the word mantras or chant the mantras, but then they did not have the purity to bring that dead animal back to life. And in that, those animal sacrifices started becoming just opportunities to slaughter animals to satisfy their tongues. So they would consume the flesh, and then other people would participate. So in order to stop that, Vishnu appeared as Buddha, and he preached the atheistic philosophy of Buddhism. So Buddhism denies any concept of God, whether impersonal or personal, right? And he rejected the Vedas. He says, don't follow the Vedas. So it was required. So God himself is coming and is saying there is no God, right? So it sounds you'd probably not find this in any other theology, especially in Abrahamic theology. Like, what kind of in theology this is, where the God comes and he says that there is no God? Well, time, place, and circumstances. Anyway, Lord Buddha does that. Now the people have lost the faith in the Vedas, which was necessary at that point in time. But then how do you re-establish the faith in the Vedas? So then Lord Shiva appears. He appears as Sankaracharya, and on the basis of Vedas, he's proving that no, there is God. It's not that God does not exist. But see, you cannot bring about you cannot bring about a significant change in the society at scale, right? If you want to change the perspective of people at a large scale, you can only bring about an incremental change. That means the philosophy that you are proposing, or the worldview that one is proposing, should not be way different from what they are accustomed to think. Otherwise, they would not accept the philosophy. So what were people accustomed to think? They were accustomed to think that there is no God because of Buddhism. Buddhism actually was not only spread all over Southeast Asia, Japan, and all the way up to Cambodia and Sri Lanka. Not only that, it was all over India. Right? India was overtaken by Buddhism. It's only that because Sankaracharya appeared and he defeated Buddhism, and then Vaishnava acharyas came and they defeated Sankara's philosophy. So what he did is, Sankaracharya, he said that no, there is God. But the idea of God that he could present should not be very different from the atheistic idea of the truth. That means if you say God does not exist, now Sankara is saying God exists. But who is that God? Well, he does not have a form. He does not have a name. He does not have any qualities. So that, well, if somebody does not believe in God, that means he has no name, no form, no qualities. That idea is not very different. So it's a sort of a covered atheism. So then that idea was easily acceptable to people. And so he was able to easily defeat Buddhism. And yet I see Buddhism is not so popular in India, though it started in India, because Sankara, he was so influential in defeating the Buddhistic philosophy. But he did it on the basis of Vedas. So now the faith in the Vedas was re-established, which was lost. So you see, there is an incremental change. Then the Vaishnava Acharyas came empowered by Krishna and Vishnu. And then again on the basis of Vedas, they provided the correct interpretation, right? So you see, they over a period of centuries, it's not all random. It's happening according to the plan, where the incremental idea is slowly presented. So anyway, so this Mayavad theory, I just want to give some background. You know, you will see this often in Srila Prabhupada books. And so though that idea is systematically defeated, you know, people in general, they don't study any philosophy systematically, right? So you know, there are people who are still influenced by atheism. There are people who are still influenced by Mayavad theory. And so Srila Prabhupada in his purports is making that distinction, because one cannot really become a devotee as long as one continues to envy the form of the Lord. So what I mean by envy is meaning is that to deny the form of the Lord, right? If you deny, then there is no question of relationship, right? The five primarily moods in which relationship can be established between the devotee and the Lord. The first, what is the first foundation? The first foundation, you have to accept that the form of the Lord exists. And as long as one is influenced by the Mayavadi idea that there is no possibility that the Lord has a spiritual form, then the question of devotion is not there. It's not possible to cultivate devotion. And that's why we see Srila Prabhupada, whenever he comes across any philosophical points where one could misinterpret, or they are already biased because of the Mayavadi perspective, then he makes an extra effort to elaborate on that. So just a little background. Okay, so having said that, okay, there is a hand that's raised, so it's maybe somebody has a question. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Hare
Krishna Prabhu.
Yeah.
So what about the philosophies? Are they atheistic?
Who?
The six philosophies, like the karma.
Oh, the six philosophies. Yeah, that's a good question. So, see, there is this idea of Saddarshan. So, in the Vedic theology, there are six philosophies that one is required to study. So, what are those six philosophies? So, the six philosophies. Let me see if I can remember. One is Sankhya. Sankhya is basically an analytical study of matter. So the 24 elements, you know, I probably mentioned this a couple of times in the past. So you can divide and analyze the entire creation or matter into 24 elements. So the 5 working senses, 5 knowledge acquiring senses, 5 sense objects, 5 elements of gross matter, then mind, intelligence, and ego, that's 23. And then there is contaminated consciousness, 24. So that's just understanding the matter. Then there is this another branch, which is, what is it called? Vaisheshika. The philosophy of Vaisheshika is literally atomism. You can think of it as the, you know, it's they talk about quantums, right? So we last class we discussed in detail how, you know, the frames on the TV, they are all pixelated, right? And actually the reality is also like that. You know, we all our body, which we think of as a solid, is actually pixelated matter. You know, we all exist in quantas. So atomism is Vaisheshika. Then there is this idea of Nyaya, which is logic. And then, you know, there is a when we try to analyze things in a logical fashion, which is required many times. So what are the rules of logic? Even the Greeks, they have, when there's a debate, they use terms like ad hominem attack, for instance. You know, if you are, or, you know, they use all these Greek terms, but, you know, again, they have also a similar idea where there is this the whole study of logic, or Nyaya, is systematically developed, which is used in analyzing and debating. So that is Nyaya. Then there is Karma Mimamsa. So the Mimamsa philosophy. The Mimamsa philosophy, you can think of that as a hermeneutics. So hermeneutics is the science of interpretation. So like if you're reading a text, how do you interpret it, right? Meaning, you know, what you have to, when you read a verse, you you have to see that, and the meaning of that verse, first of all, we have to understand independently, but also in relation to the previous verse. That means it should not contradict the idea that is presented in the previous verse. So if there are multiple interpretations that are possible, and Prabhupada says, you don't need to interpret if things are clear. But if there is any doubt or some possibility of confusion, then we have to see which of those interpretations they are in alignment with the previous verse. And so the verses need to align with each other. Then apart from that, they should also align with the overall theme of the chapter. And then the chapter that should align with the overall idea that is presented in the entire text or the entire canto. And then if there is a contradiction somewhere with another verse somewhere, how do you reconcile that and how do you holistically look at it? There is an entire science of it's called hermeneutics in English. So that is Mimamsa. Then there is the philosophy of what is it? The philosophy of yoga, which is Patanjali's yoga system. So where they go into how one controls chakras in the body and the air, and how one can by there are different aspects of pranayam is there. There is niyama, yam niyam, pranayam, right? Then there is dhyan. I am not able to recall all the phases, but there is ultimately one reaches the perfection or samadhi. So that science is there. And then what is the sixth branch, which is what am I missing? Vedanta. Vedanta is the conclusion. Is the conclusion of all Vedic knowledge. So which is what I mentioned in the very first class in the preface, right? For any sampradaya to be established, they have to comment on the Vedanta Sutras or the Brahma Sutras. The Brahma Sutras are aphorisms or basically essence of all Vedic literature. So the essence of the Vedas was captured in the Upanishads. And even from the Upanishads, some of the very principal aphorisms were collected in the form of Brahma Sutras, which was compiled by Vyasadeva himself. So any sampradaya, anyone cannot just start their own branch or sampradaya. The idea is to be established. They have to provide a commentary on the Brahma Sutras, in which the foundation of the commentary is what is their idea of super soul and soul. Are they one? Are they different? And there are the entire spectrum between one. They are exactly the same, or they they are completely different. And within that spectrum, there are different variations. So anyway, so all these philosophies together, they are called Sad Darshan, or the six worldviews, the six perspectives. So the question that Saravana Prabhu asked is, are these philosophies theistic or atheistic? Well, in the true sense, they are all theistic philosophies. They don't comprise. They don't fall in the umbrella of atheism or atheistic philosophies. Now there are instances that you will find where those are interpreted in an atheistic fashion, but like Kapila, right? So when Kapila, who elaborated on the philosophy of Sankhya, or the analytical study of matter, and Kapila Muni is actually an empowered incarnation of Vishnu himself, right? He is God himself. Who appeared in Satyuga in Bindu Sarovar, which is in Gujarat, Siddhpur. So that place is still there. And he established the philosophy of Sankhya. Now there was another atheistic Kapila who appeared. Now it just happens that his name is also Kapila, and then he also commented on Sankhya, but he commented in an atheistic way. So this is a very, and in that case, people might confuse between which Kapila is it, the theistic. They might not even know that that they might only know the atheistic Kapila Muni, and they might not know the original personality of Godhead who appeared as Kapila Muni, and so that could create confusion. Similarly, the Patanjali's yoga system, if you see the yogas, the original idea is that of personality. I think in one. If you read the original text of Patanjali, I think it says that the ultimate purpose of that is to achieve the perfection and realize the form of the Lord. But even in India, when the yoga is practiced, it's not practiced as a means or an instrument for spiritual perfection or realization, or specifically in terms of realizing the form of the God. And there is this movement to, what you call remove what they say, remove the religious element out of yoga. And so like the kind of yoga that is practiced here in the West, the spiritual aspect or the religious aspect is completely taken out, and they is interpreted in terms of how one can look better and feel better, and so all these different ideas are there. So basically anything is subject to be misused and misinterpreted. But yes, the original purpose or the true spirit of all the six philosophies is in a theistic fashion. I hope that answers your question. Okay, I take that as a yes. Yeah, so Mayavadi here, Prabhupada is saying the Mayavadi theory of oneness of the spirit soul cannot be entertained on the ground that the spirit soul cannot be cut into pieces as a fragmental portion. Because we'll learn later, the soul cannot be cut, it cannot be made wet, it cannot be dried, it cannot be burnt. So such cutting of different individual souls would make the supreme cleavable or changeable against the principle of that the super souls being unchangeable. So Krishna, see, it will confirm in Bhagavad Gita that soul does not change. Now, if you cut it, or if it can be broken down into pieces, then it violates that principle. Right? As confirmed in Gita, the fragmental portion of the supreme exists eternally, Sanatan, but they are kshara, that means they are fallible, that they have a tendency to fall down into the material nature. These fragmental portions are eternally so, and even after liberation, the individual soul remains the same. So it's not that one achieves perfection, liberation, even an impersonal liberation if someone achieves, right? The Brahmavadis, when they achieve the Brahman, it's, they become particles in the effulgence or the Brahman effulgence that is coming from the spiritual planets. But it's not that they lose their existence. And then later the example is given. So in the Brahmavad or even for the Mayavad philosophy, or the idea that is given is many times give the example which is mentioned over here, that well, the sky is, you say the sky is one, but the sky is reflected in multiple water bodies. So you might have a pond or a water tank, and you will see one reflection of the sky in the pond, another reflection of the sky in another body of water like a lake. And so by this analogy, they try to explain that, well, the ultimate truth is one, but is reflected differently in different bodies. And when these bodies die, the again merges into the original absolute truth. Just like the sky is everywhere, right? And then you have different pots. So within the pots also the air is there, and it seems like air is contained within that pot, another than pot. But if the pot breaks, then the air again merges into the atmospheric air, right? So similarly, see, their idea is, well, when the body dies, then achieves perfection, then the spirit inside the body just merges with the homogeneous spirit outside. That's their idea. But Hilshwar Prabhupada gives a more detail to that explanation, and gives us an idea how we should interpret it correctly. So, well, the sky, when you talk about sky, the sky is not a homogeneous entity, because the sky contains the sun and the moon. And when you say the sky is reflected in the bodies of water, well, the sun, moon, and the stars are also reflected. And Srila Prabhupada makes the point over here that, well, the reflection of the star is there. It's just that you cannot perceive it because, they are not as bright as sun and the moon. Similarly, you can compare the living entities to be the stars. So when and the super soul or Paramatma to be sun or moon. And so when in our body, both soul and super soul are present, right? I am soul, I am Atma, but then Paramatma is also within my body. Now, because the stars, so we are like stars, so our effulgence is not strong, so we are overwhelmed by matter. That means we cannot perceive ourselves, our spiritual identity, we cannot perceive because we are overwhelmed by the existence or the covering of matter. But the super soul or the Paramatma is not overwhelmed. Just like the reflection of the sun or the moon in a water body, it is prominent, but the reflection of the star is not prominent. The other example that is many times given is in the Mayavad perspective, they say that if you take a water body, in the water body, you take large water body comprises of water molecules, right? And then, you can take the water molecules out of the large body. The large body more or less remains intact. And then if you put the water back into that water body, it again merges. So similarly, they are saying that, well, the soul, can be contained in a different body, just like water can be contained in different vessels, but you can again merge it back. Just like you can again merge the water back into the larger water body. Similarly, the soul, when it is not contained by the body, it again merges into the Brahman and loses its identity. That's the whole idea that they are saying. Well, again, for the same example, Srila Prabhupada says that water is not a homogeneous entity. Water, it appears like that, but if you're standing on the beach, water just appears like a homogeneous body of water, which there is no variety. But when one actually goes inside the water, you go in a submarine or even in a ship, then you can see, well, it's not just a homogeneous body. There's a lot of variety. What is the variety? There's so many aquatic animals, right? There are different fishes, and there's so much inside the water, and all of them are individual. Each of those aquatic animals, they are individual. Similarly, from our perspective, it appears that the Brahman is just a homogeneous entity. But if you go and look there in detail, the Brahman actually comprises of innumerable souls who are just like the aquatics are swimming in the water bodies. Similarly, all these souls, they are they are sort of floating in that vast Brahman, and they have their original the individuality is still there. It's not that they lose their individuality. Just like on a person on a shore, that person, for him it might appear that, oh, somebody got drowned, oh, that means he had lost his identity, he merged, right? Or somebody, or let's say not drowned, but let's say scuba diver goes and he jumps off the boat, and this person is watching, oh, this person jumped into the ocean, and it disappears from his vision because he's out standing on the beach, and he might think, oh, this person has merged into the ocean. Or sometimes you see the fish, or there are turtles who are born, right? And the turtles, they lay their eggs on the beach, and after the eggs hatch, they start crawling, and they go into the water body and go inside the ocean. Now, for somebody on the beach, they might think, oh, the turtle merged into the ocean because now I cannot see it. It's its identity is lost. But it's not that the turtle loses its identity. It's still there. I mean, we cannot perceive it. The scuba diver who dives is not loses his identity. It's still there and floating. Similarly, when the Brahmavadis they achieve spiritual perfection, they merge with the Brahman, it's not that they lose the identity. From our perspective, it might appear like that. So again, those are the distinctions that one need to understand. Okay. Is that clear? Any questions on this point? Okay. So the individual fragmental spirit soul, Kashyap, you want to say something?
Yeah, I'm getting an echo. Anyway,
I can hear you.
In any case, for example, in case of Brahmavadis or in case of Vaishnava Sampradaya, the first step is actually to achieve the spiritual perfection, right? In all the cases, the first thing. And the only difference that we are talking here is after we achieve spiritual perfection and after we left our body, is the soul is going to be independent or not. That is the only difference I could see. And that is something that no one I mean, we definitely have references of scriptures and everything, but only one should experience by really going through that phase, and it is going to happen only once actually did the spiritual perfection. So at least till that point, it's the same thing. So I mean, it is the same path. So um, my question is, why why someone have to, I mean, have to think about something that they will know only after some time. I mean, they can't even, I mean, it's like thinking about doing a PhD before even completing a 10th class. I feel something like that. Is that something correct way I'm thinking, or do
Yeah,
you think?
so it's a good point, but I would like to mention that the based on what your goal is, the path was also not same, in the sense that because the Brahmavadis, or even Mayavadis definitely, but even the Brahmavadis, when they have the idea that the absolute truth does not have any form, nature, or qualities, their spiritual practices are different than that of the Vaishnavas. So both of them are trying to achieve perfection, but their paths are not same. The Brahmavadis, they try to cultivate a lot of knowledge, and they become very dry in their relationships, in the sense that they become aloof from the world. They're not really engaged, and also their idea is they have to perform extreme austerities, which it's very difficult in this age anyways. And they try to meditate on the soul which is within their body and the Paramatma within, and by doing that, when you realize that, and when you meditate on the Brahman, then you achieve Brahman. So even I'm talking about let's say even Brahmavadis, right? So it's, even if you don't talk about Mayavadis, so their path is different. Again, the path is not same, because their idea of the absolute perfection is different, because they are denying, they are against from negativity, they want to come to neutrality, right? The Vaishnavas, they want to go beyond neutrality and all the way up to the positive spectrum, but they, in a way, the achieving neutrality is just becomes a, as soon as, here's the thing, so as soon as you achieve something positive, it is anyway be neutral. Neutrality is already sort of included in it, right? It goes beyond neutrality, so you're not trying to shoot for neutrality. Now, because they are against, or they don't have the idea of the form of the Lord, they are not interested in the personal aspect of it. So even when the practices are not very relishable, if you see the practice of the Brahmavadis, they are not very relishable, because they deny relationships. The Vaishnavas, on the other hand, because they accept the Lord, they also accept the devotees of the Lord, and they see everyone as the devotees. The pure devotees, actually those who are really pure, once they achieve perfection, every living entity they look upon as a devotee of the Lord. Even if one is not at that stage, even in the beginning stage, they begin to make distinction. Okay, somebody is already on the spiritual path, right? They see, oh, this is a devotee of the Lord. So there is a respect. There are 6 ways you exchange love and love with other devotees, which is also there in any kind of relationships, even if it is not spiritual. For instance, you go and there is this idea of you go and have food or prasadam at suppose you want to establish a relationship with someone, or you already have a relationship with someone. There are 6 foundations or 6 pillars. What are the 6 pillars? You go and have food at that person's home, and you invite that person at your home to have food. Then you receive gifts from that person, you give gifts to that person, right? Then if you have something that's bothering you, or you need guidance or opinion or something confidential, you feel like you can share with that person. And similarly, that other person will share those things and inquire from you confidentially. So these 6 principles are foundation of any relationship, whether on a material platform or a spiritual platform. So in the Vaishnava worldview, only the consciousness changes. That's why Srila Prabhupada called it Krishna consciousness. You don't have to make drastic changes to your life. But if you are somebody on a Brahmavad path, they come. Why they are pursuing Brahmavad is that they realize that as long as you deal with people, there's going to be sufferings and problems, and they might not really acknowledge that, but some of them might do. But the foundation of the whole idea is that, well, if there should be happiness beyond this, and because individuals and people are source of all the problems, then the absolute truth should be devoid of it. That is the underlying foundation. And so even when their spiritual practice begins over here, it's very dry, it's very, rough, and it's very hard, and, it's a very difficult path because what they are pursuing. So it's right from the beginning, it is fully laden with difficulties and dryness. And even when you achieve the destination, there is no rasa. It's devoid of rasa. There is, that's why we say satta chitta ananda. So sat is there. The thing is, the person is fed up of asat. That means, this body is constantly dying, and whatever I have is everything is temporary. Everything is frustrated. So they want to get beyond it, but they only get satta. They don't get chitta, or they don't get ananda. But the Vaishnavas, you get satta, chit, ananda all together. Just like I gave the example, a person who is, somebody might be, very longing for a good taste. At the same time, they are very, very hungry, and then they are malnourished, right? Then just by having palatable food, all three are simultaneously satisfied. The longingness to taste something nice is satisfied, the hunger is satisfied, as well as the body is nourished. So the path of bhakti or the devotion is like that. So, once the ananda, the ultimate goal is ananda, but then automatically the chit and sat is also realized. And this process is joyful right from the beginning, right? It's not a morose process. Not asking you to go and sit in a cave and then, analytically try to realize that, well, there is a soul, and okay, you have peace in the cave, and, you don't have to deal with people anymore. And so so the path is different, and the final destination is also different. It's not the same. I mean, the Brahmavadis, they stop at Brahman, and then the devotees, they're not even trying to get Brahman. They're just going past it. So that's what I think I would like to say. And that's why it's very important to really understand what, you cannot, there is this idea of sambandh, abhideya, and prayojan. So first we have to understand what our goal is, right? What is it that we are trying to shoot for? How we are related to that goal, right? Then there is abhideya, then there is a process of achieving it. And then prayojan is the final result that you get when one achieves that perfection. So in that sense, the destination and the process are different for the Brahmavadis and the Vaishnavas. Though that destination is also not independent of Krishna, because everything you see, whether in this world, is all dependent on Krishna. Just like Krishna in Bhagavatam, he says that, I am the one who theists, those who are theists, astic. I am the one who the theists worship, and I am also the one who the atheists deny, right? So as soon as you say the word atheist, that what is that definition? That definition is in relation to the God. Though it is in a negative way, it is still in relation to the God. What is the foundation, right? Or even you say, I'm agnostic. Well, one could identify one in any other way, but okay, that means I don't care about whether God exists or does not exist. But then the definition itself is based on the God, right? So, now Krishna does not make any distinction between, he's not, I mean, he has special attachment towards his devotees, but in general, he loves everyone. That's why he's present as a Paramatma in the body of atheist also. So I think I lost my track of thinking, but yeah. So yeah, what I was trying to say is that, well, yeah, those who are worshipping Brahman, in a way, their destination is different. You could also say, well, yeah, Brahman is part of Krishna. Yes, yeah, it is part of Krishna, but it is a different aspect of it. It's not the absolute truth, and so the goal is different and the process is different. I hope that clarifies your question or provides an answer.
Yeah. So I was actually reading Bhagavad. Probably this is a little bit off topic. Maybe I can talk offline if it is thing. So I'll just introduce it and stop it
Sure,
there.
sure. Yeah, and again, you can ask. All right, it's okay.
I was comment, there is one thing which actually says about Virat Rupa, like
Yeah.
explaining about Atala, some Patala, something
Yes.
everything, and what is his mouth? The mouth is of fire, and eyes are with whatever it is. So what I understand from the chapter is, to meditate, you have to imagine that form of Virata Rupa, and then you actually get the realization of Vishnu Rupa, Vishnu with 4 hands and everything. Then you keep that in your mind continuously and keep on meditating on that form of Vishnu. So see, obviously there are so many information here. Like there is one part of it saying it is everything is Krishna, and there is a different loka for Krishna, and there is a Virata Rupa, which I think will also come in the Bhagavad Gita also. Like he will show when
Yes.
when he shows to the Arjuna, there is a Rupa that Krishna shows to him, and so which actually explains that everything that is available in this entire world is part of him. That means including us. Then why do we think we are not part of him? I mean, why do we think we are separate? I know, I totally understand. And if we take the path of bhakti, we have to see him as a bigger thing, and definitely we have to worship him to get that grace to actually realize that the truth, actually realizing the truth. It's just not knowing it, just realizing it with experience. To get that grace and everything, we should definitely go and worship him, and even after that also we should worship him. That's what even all the rishis did it in the past. But if you see in that perspective, in the Virat Rupa perspective, like with everything, like including the earth, or the air or fire, all the 5 elements, or even there is, I think, somewhere in the Bhagavad Gita also it says that there are 8 elements, like uh, all five elements, and um, mind.
Yeah, Bhinna Prakriti
Right.
Ashtada. Yes. Krishna
And,
says 8 elements are my separated energies. They are my
right.
energies.
So if that is the case, I mean, if that is the case, like, why do we think that we are separate? And if we think that we are separate from him, um, uh, some reason I don't know, I couldn't connect the whole picture, because if we are separate, if everything is separate, I would always treat someone as someone else, and I ever get a affection that I have on myself to a second person. Like if he's separate and I'm separate, and why would I ever get a affection that I have on myself with someone else? Like for example, we are treating Krishna as everyone, and we treat people like Krishna, and we give all our affections thinking that we are giving to Krishna. That means we are seeing him as one. That means we are in a way saying that we are all one.
I get
Then
your
why we are
questions. Yeah. So I'll answer that. So the thing is, if you look at the 4 philosophies of the Vaishnavas, right? And then what were the 2 ends of the spectrum that I mentioned? The one end of the spectrum, which is saying that, which is actually Brahmavad. It's almost goes on the Brahmavad, where they say that there is no difference between the soul and the super soul. But if you look at the Vaishnava philosophy, they are excluding that extreme. And then they are talking about the entire spectrum. Now, if you look at the entire spectrum, then what is the entire spectrum? Well, they're saying that, well, there is similarity and there is difference. See, both are mentioned. So how do you understand that? Now, everyone is on a different scale. If you look at the 4 sampradayas, they are all on different scale. So what the Sri Vaishnava, they are saying Visishta Advaitavad. Visishta Advaitavad means Advait means there is no difference, but there is some special features. You see? So then there is Dvaitavad, means there is a more emphasis on differences. but that the foundation is still sameness. So how do you understand this? So the example that is given is there is a qualitatively they are same, but quantitatively they are different, right? In the sense that, you know, there is a gold mine which is the source of all gold, but then there are small nuggets of gold. So we are we are fragmental portions. That's why, you know, here right here it says, see, the individual fragmental spirit soul is represented by Arjuna, and the super soul is the personality of Godhead. So we are fragments, but both are fragments. See, this is spirit and this is also spirit, but there is supreme spirit and we are fragmental spirit. So the connection is there. It's not that they are totally different, you know, different. The basis is still there. Just like fire, there is a bonfire and a spiritual spark that comes from that bonfire. That spiritual spark has its own identity, but it will remain fiery as long as it is in contact with the original bonfire. But if it falls on the ground, then its fiery nature is lost. Now coming to the example, so yeah, so it's not that we are totally different, right? It's not that we are totally different. There is a sameness, but at the same time we don't lose our identity. So qualitatively we are same, but just because we are qualitatively same, we cannot say that we don't have our identity. That is a distinction between the Mayavad and the Vaishnava philosophy. Mayavadi says that, well, we don't have an identity. The idea of identity that we have is illusory. You know, it's just an illusion. But in reality, what is reality? The absolute truth is that we don't have our identity. That's what they are saying. But the Vaishnava idea is no, the identity always persists, right? What makes us different from Krishna is that we are a distinct identity. But then what is common? The common is that, yeah, we both are spirit. That's why Krishna is saying that I existed, you existed, the kings existed. Why did they all that? Why all of them existed? Right? Because they are all eternal, but the identity persisted. It's not that the identity was lost. So the Sat nature, the Chit nature, the Ananda nature, that connects us. But because this Sat, Chit and Anand connects us with Krishna, that doesn't mean that we don't have our individual identity. Now coming to the question of people, you know, how come that people love each other? Well, the people love each other because they relate with each other. What is that relation? The immediate relation is, you know, when people think, oh, I am the body. Okay, because I am this body, all my bodily extensions, those are of my immediate conscience. That's why I love my child, because my child is a bodily extension of myself. I love my parents because I am an extension of their bodies. And then because you know, my family of this particular caste or clan, it comes from this genealogy, and so those are my next expanded interest. And that interest says, you know, then I have to choose beyond that, then that would expand further to my race, and that would expand further to my country, right? And that would expand further to my species. So the idea that you know, humans, like the Christian idea, well, the God gave humans the dominion over animals. That means you can exploit the animals, right? That's how they take it literally. So if it is a human interest, then we can exploit other species of life. So that is speciesism. It's like there is racism, there is speciesism. So what is it? What was the foundation of all that? The foundation of all this is because I am body, or then there are further expansions of the bodies, right? Extensions of the bodies, right? So but what happens is, because we identify ourselves as body, even though we try to increase the scope, because that identity is false, there's only so much you can expand or extend our concern and love, right? Most people, they are just interested in their own self or their immediate family members. But then the philanthropists who have the means and the resources, they are able to extend it little further. But no matter how far they can extend, they won't be able to cover all entities. But when a pure devotee, a Vaishnava, his foundation is soul, and he says it's the same soul, spirit, which exists in me, it exists in a small ant, that exists in a big elephant, it exists in the dog eater. There is a verse that will come later in Bhagavad Gita. You know, a Brahmana is one who sees everyone with equal vision because he sees the same spirit soul. So based on that identity, and when he says, oh, that is person is that spirit identity, he is related to Krishna, I am related to Krishna, that's why we are all related to each other. And then that person is able to extend that love unconditionally to all living entities, right? So he's not limited, because now the foundation is based on the spiritual identity. And because they know that this identity will persist, one takes the effort to extend that concern and love. But what happens is when the idea is that, well, our identity is an illusion. If you go with the Mayavad idea that, well, the identity is an illusion, then, okay, so this identity is eventually gonna perish. It's going to merge into something. Then why bother them? So that's why the Mayavadis, they tend to be really dry. If you see their entire process, they're denying the existence and of individuals. So if you literally take that worldview, it really is not very fulfilling, right? So in regard to Virat Swarup, so there is this idea of gradual progression. So the people, they have, they were not really ready to accept the personal aspect of the Lord, the personality of Godhead. But then they have appreciation for the nature. So those descriptions of the Bhagavatam, by those descriptions, they are also bringing them to the idea of personality. Unlike Brahmavad is not doing that. But when Bhagavatam talks about Virat Rup, what is it doing? Okay, there are 14 planetary systems, right? And there is different aspects. So the mountains are compared to the bones of the Lord, and the rivers are compared to the veins of the Lord. The trees which are growing, they're compared to the hairs, right? And then the upper planetary systems are on the chest, and then there is Brahmaloka on the head, and the lower planetary systems are on his thighs and legs. The hellish planets are on his behind. And so all this, why all that, which is true, it's not just metaphorical, but by that they are bringing those persons to the idea of a personality. That Virat Swarup, what does Swarup mean? The word Swarup itself means person. So people who are attracted by that nature is saying, okay, this nature is there, but this nature is not just a homogeneous energy which is just existing out in the random. There is a structure to it, and there's a form to it. And what is that form? That form is the form of a person. So you see, the Bhagavatam is still bringing them to the idea of personality, using the concepts of the impersonal concepts that people are attracted by. So there is a distinction. So Bhagavatam is on a completely different platform. It's bringing them to the idea of personality. It might appear that, it's using, and it is using impersonal aspects, but what is it that it's leading it to? It's leading to the personal idea, the idea of a personality, right? But if you read the Brahmavad, their philosophy, they're not going to talk about Virat Swarup or, in that sense. I don't know, maybe they talk, I don't know. I can't claim I've read all that, but text. But mostly, if you read the descriptions, they mostly comment on this Brahma Sutras. The Brahma Sutras are, they are not written in a very direct form, and they say Tattvam iti, and neti, it is not this, it is that, and so it is spoken in a very not in absolute very distinct terms. And so if you look, from what I understand, a lot of the texts that they focus on and study, they don't talk about Swarup, forget about the Syam Sundar Rup, but even Virat Swarup, those descriptions that you won't find in the Brahmavad theology. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, sure. I'll obviously study more and try to understand more, but yeah, it actually really helps me to discuss with these things and try to understand the perspective and take it forward. Thank you.
Sure, no worries. And if you have any questions anytime, feel free to ask, because it's an important point. It's that the idea of impersonalism is there. It's deeply ingrained in our psyche, even in the thought process, though we might not have systematically studied it. And so, like, when you bring up all these points, I think it really helps me and I all the participants as well. Okay. Yeah, so Prabhupada is saying, well, Krishna and Arjuna, they are not on the same level, right? And then this will be further described in the 4th chapter, where Krishna says that, well, both you and me had many births. You don't remember them, I remember them all. Now, if Arjuna is on the same level as Krishna, and Krishna is not superior to Arjuna, then the whole idea, why bother listening to Krishna? I think we mentioned that in the past. Such instruction would be useless. And because even the instructor would be under the clutches of Maya, and so he cannot be an authoritative instructor. Okay. So I think that's the end of verse number 13. I think we can move on to the next verse. Matra sparsastu kaunteya sitoshna sukha dukhada agamapayino nityastam titikshava bharata. It's also a very important verse. Another word you should try to memorize, if possible, just like the previous verse. O son of Kunti, the non-permanent appearance of happiness and distress and their disappearance in due course are like appearance and disappearance of winter and summer seasons. They arise from sense perception, O scion of Bharat. One must learn to tolerate them without being disturbed. So in the previous verse, Krishna is established that we are not the body, right? The body changes, the soul does not change. And because body is changing, and not only the body is changing, but what the body is subjected to is also changing. Like body is subjected to different sense perception. The body comprises of senses, right? We have knowledge acquiring senses. I can touch, I can see, I can taste, I can smell. And then all the senses are subjected to sense perceptions, right? And the senses are part of the body. So some sense perceptions are pleasing, other sense perceptions are not pleasing. Like in winter, it's extreme cold, or summer could be extreme hot. And similarly, so that is the direct senses, but then that's mind is also a sense. Just like my tongue can be, I might have opportunity to eat something very tasty, but sometimes, it could be something very, not palatable. Similarly, the heat and the cold, it changes according to the seasons, is something I can feel through my skin. And then smell, I could be subjected to pleasant or obnoxious smells. And sometimes the sights that my eyes is subjected could be pleasing or could be ghastly. And so the senses, the gross senses, are subjected to pleasant and unpleasant situations. But the mind is also is considered the sixth sense, and the mind itself could be subjected to different kind of mental happiness and distress. But the point is that all of them, they appear and disappear in due course of time, just like seasons. And so one must learn to tolerate, and that's what Krishna is telling to Arjuna, that if we know that this is temporary, it's not permanent, so we know that it's not going to last forever. And so one should learn how to tolerate it, because we are not the body, we are the soul, but the body is subjected to a lot of different things, and the body is changing, even what it's subjected to is changing, and so one must learn to tolerate it. So that is the implication of the learning from the previous verse. The previous verse is just saying that we are not the body. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada mentions that the seasons is in the proper discharge of duty, one has to tolerate the non-permanent appearance and disappearance of the happiness. Just like in the Vedic injunction is that traditionally people would go and take bath in the river, or even if they're not taking a bath in the river, you didn't have geysers or hot water, and you just use the whatever the external temperature of the body, the water is. So it's very cold during winter, and despite of that, in Vedic culture, you wake up early in the morning and the first thing you do is take bath. You don't skip bath. And so though it is inconvenient, one voluntarily accepts that inconvenience for a higher purpose, and one does not hesitate to take bath. Similarly, when one is cooking, and cooking means whatever form of appliances we use, whether it's cow dung or gas or electric oil, there is a heat. Without heat, you cannot cook. And then during summer, the temperatures are anyway very hot, and then further one is subjected to heat, and that is not very comfortable. But one does not stop the duty of cooking, right? And so one does not hesitate to cook during summer season. So the point is that one should be motivated by the sense of duty, which are prescribed according to one's nature. And in course of execution of one's duty, one should not take into account any conveniences or inconveniences, because those conveniences and inconveniences, they arise out of sense perception, right? In the sense perception, and it is temporary. It will go away. It's there today, but it will go away. Is always there. It's existing. It's eternal, right? It's not it's not that I do something today and I don't do tomorrow. That is then that's not, that's whimsical. So basically it goes back to Arjuna. You're saying, Arjuna, you are giving different ideas of what is favorable. He says, if I win the war, that would be favorable only if my relatives survive. If the relatives die, then that's not favorable. And because it's not favorable, I won't do my duty. Right? So that's not a good excuse, though. No matter how intelligently one might put that or come up with different arguments. That's why Krishna tells to Arjuna in the second verse of this chapter, as we saw, he's saying, you sound very intelligent, but you are actually a fool. He says that indirectly. How come all these impurities arose upon you? So one has to follow prescribed rules and regulations of religious principles in order to rise up to the platform of knowledge. Because by knowledge and devotion only can one liberate him from the clutches of illusion, right? So here the point is, what knowledge is Srila Prabhupada talking about? He's saying, by following rules and regulations, one has to follow rules and regulations in order to rise up to the platform of knowledge. So without rules and regulations, the thing is, the way most people learn, right? We people are, they cultivate the sense of duty either because of their parents or superiors. But then by that, they are put into some regulation, some schedule where you have to do this. Like the child does not understand why he is doing what, the parents say you have to go to school, you have to learn this. He has no idea why he has to learn, for what purpose, what is he going to gain, right? But by being subjected to rules and regulations, the child learns those things, though he does not know the purpose for it. But eventually, when he grows up and gets maturity, he will come to the platform of knowledge. Why I am doing this? What was the purpose, right? So similarly, even in case of varnashram, when people take up varnashram duty, they take up because of upbringing, because of samskaras. And not unless somebody is a trained brahmana, they don't necessarily know that what is the ultimate purpose for which I am doing my duties. They might not have a very scholarly understanding of dharma, or what is the purpose, but they nevertheless they do it. And by doing those activities, eventually when they achieve maturity, and they don't have to even study scriptures or that, like, but a Vaishya, just because by the nature maybe he's doing farming or taking care of the cows, but he's trained from his childhood, but when they grow up, they achieve maturity, then they will ultimately get knowledge. Maybe they will hear from other superiors or spiritually realized persons, but they cannot wait until somebody tells them and they have only after I know, then I would start working on it. It doesn't work like that. But then eventually they know, what is the purpose? Okay, the ultimate purpose of doing all this is, one cultivates the knowledge that by acting according to one's nature, I'm serving two purposes. One is for the satisfaction of Vishnu. I offer my work as a sacrifice. And at the same time, I'm not affected by karma. And so that, all this different kind of understanding we'll later learn in 3rd and 4th chapter. So the purpose is ultimately to gain that knowledge, right? But one cannot artificially gain that knowledge. One has to, because, okay, even if you gain knowledge, what you will do? After gaining knowledge, if one really understands the purpose, then they have to come back and do their prescribed rules, prescribed duties. Like Arjuna, right? In right now he does not have knowledge, but once he gets the knowledge, he has to come to the same conclusion. Well, he has to go and perform his duties according to the rules and regulations. So he's not going to be able to escape that. So it's not that one has to wait until they get knowledge before they can perform their duties. So start with the duties, and then eventually they will come to the platform of knowledge. That's what Krishna is saying. And once they have knowledge, then they achieve the ultimate purpose. They can cultivate devotion, and by devotion, they can ultimately release oneself from the clutches of illusion. So now there are two different names which are given to Arjuna, like in other contexts, and they are all significant. So here Krishna is addressing him as Kaunteya. It means it's the son of Kunti. So he's trying to signify the relationship Arjuna has with Krishna, first of all, right? Because they're cousin, they're related on the maternal side. Krishna and Arjuna, they're related. And then he is also referred to as a Bharata. So by referring to Kaunteya, his a great blood relationship on the mother side is emphasized, and by referring him as a Bharata, son of Bharat Maharaj. So on his paternal side is also, he has a great lineage. And those who have great lineage, right, there is a great responsibility in the matter of proper execution of the duties. So in that sense, Krishna is trying to highlight his heritage and make it, basically give him a hint. He's saying, well, he's what in the context of the verse, he's saying that you have to tolerate the inconveniences in the course of execution of duty, and especially someone like you who has a great heritage, and you have this entire lineage, and all your elders and superiors, they have executed their duties with sincerity. Similarly, you're also, it is only befitting if you do that as well. Okay, so that's the end of the 14th verse. Anyone has any questions or comments? Okay, you go to the next verse. Verse number 15. Yam hina vyachayanti ete purusam purusha rishava samadukha sukham dhiram so amritvaya kalpate. Translation: O best among men, Arjuna, the person who is not disturbed by happiness and distress and is steady in both is certainly eligible for liberation. So here Krishna is further elaborating on the point. So he's saying, first he said, well, you have to tolerate happiness and distress, right? And then what will happen if one tolerates? First of all, one has to tolerate because on what basis? You tolerate on the basis that, well, they are temporary, and because they are temporary, it will go away in due course of time. So better tolerate it. So what happens when you tolerate? When one tolerates, then the outcome is that one becomes eligible for liberation. So in the purport, Srila Prabhupada is mentioning, anyone who is steady in his determination for the advanced stage of spiritual realization and can equally tolerate the onslaughts of distress and happiness is certainly a person eligible for liberation. So similarly, in the spiritual path or spiritual realization also, we have to tolerate things, right? We are not performing extreme austerities, but there is some inconvenience. We have to make adjustments to our life, or take time out to read or chant, or do deity worship, and there is a proper schedule, right? And there are rules and regulations. So and in course of execution of those duties, those don't change, right? Every day, there is a systematic, that's why it's called sadhana. That means, there is a regulated practice, but every day is not same. Some days are favorable, some days are not favorable. There's always different kind of challenges that come up in our daily life. I mean, on a larger scale, like a pandemic or economic downturns, or on a personal scale, there might be challenges within our family, could be health reasons, monetary reasons, personal issues. But we tolerate all that and we keep on executing our duties, right? Then this is in our Grihastha ashram, right? But then it applies to all other ashrams. In Brahmacharya ashram, when traditionally when students used to go to Gurukul and learn under the guidance of a guru, obviously they have also a very regimented living. And then after Grihastha ashram, you have Vanprasth, and then there is sannyas. So here Prabhupada is saying the fourth stage of life, namely sannyas ashram, or the renounced order of life, is especially painstaking because one gives up association, not association in the sense that one is not involved in day-to-day activities. Children are generally grown up, they are able to, they have their own family, they are old enough to take their decisions, and it is at that stage when one did not be encumbered by the daily dealings and activities of family life, right? And they can take more time to for spiritual realization. That means traveling to different holy places in the context of Kali Yuga, residing in the association of other Vaishnavas, and reading scriptures, chanting. So obviously one lives simply, right? Even in material life, we see people, they downsize and you don't need a big home anymore, right? So that in itself is an inconvenience, like even if they don't have any spiritual goals. So what to speak who are very serious about spiritual realization, they accept different kind of inconveniences. Why? Right? So especially in the renounced order, because they are very serious to make their life perfect. And so despite of all the difficulties, they accept that. And you see, what is the most difficult thing? Well, the most difficult thing is not the physical inconveniences, but the fact that one has to sever relationships with the family, right? Now we say that, well, how is it? Well, we just talked about the Maya or the Brahmavadis. They are not interested in personal relationships, right? And they directly go to sannyas. And a lot of Brahmavadis, the idea is we give up. We can do in the Vaishnava path also. It's not there. It's not that it's not. It's not that it's not allowed that Vaishnavas do not directly take sannyas. But the Brahma, especially among the Brahmavadis and Mayavadis, the idea is they should take sannyas early in the life. But in the Vaishnavas, when they take sannyas, the thing is, when the body dies, the family relationships are anyway going to get over, right? Even if one doesn't want, the time will force it. So after having finished all duties towards the family, right, and make the independent, this is the time for one to really focus, concentrated way. So in that case, one voluntarily gives up. It's not out of any enmity or ill feelings. But that is an inconvenient thing, whether one gives up voluntarily or in the course of time, it is forcefully taken away in both cases. So rather than take it away forcefully, at appropriate time, one voluntarily limits or reduces one engagement and eventually, completely stops it and focuses fully in spiritual realization. So similarly, Arjuna's discharge of duties as Kshatriya, he is advised to persevere, even if it is difficult to fight with his family members. So Lord Chaitanya also took sannyas at a very age of 24, and he has his dependents. He has his young wife and an old mother. He had no one else to look after them. Yet for a higher cause, he took sannyas. So as I was saying, it's not that Vaishnavas, they cannot take sannyas at an early age. So why did Chaitanya Mahaprabhu do that? Now Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is Krishna himself, and he appeared in the mood and complexion of Radharani. So when Krishna appeared in his original form in Vrindavan 5,500 years ago, at the age of 11, he left Vrindavan and went to Mathura because Kamsa had invited him. Because Kamsa was afraid, well, if I don't somehow get rid of Krishna, and he was not able to do that. He arranged for a wrestling match, and there was his plan anyway. So Krishna has to go for Mathura, and the gopis were devastated completely. Elderly gopis or all the residents of Vrindavan, they were so much tormented. Many of them just fainted, just see Krishna go. when Krishna went to Mathura, he didn't come back to Vrindavan. After Mathura, he left for Dwarka because Jarasandha attacked Mathura, and that is another pastime. And then after a long time, another 100 years passes away, and then every single day the residents of Vrindavan, they are waiting for Krishna to come. They do meet him once, just around the time of Kurukshetra war or just after it. And Kurukshetra, the residents of Vrindavan knew that Krishna is going to come to Kurukshetra because there is a solar eclipse, and they would come to perform sacrifices, and so they all came to meet. They were happy to see Krishna and all his queens after a long time. It's like almost 100 years passed, but they didn't feel the same satisfaction. Now at the time, it's just Dwapar Yuga, so people used to live more than 100 years, but they were not satisfied to see Krishna, because Krishna, you're like king. You all the queens and all the entourage and opulence. We feel distance. We don't feel the intimacy. The only Krishna that is a cowherd boy. He's just he doesn't have any position, or is in that sense. And so they say you should come to Vrindavan, and we want to relate with you in your original form. So eventually Krishna goes after killing Dantavakra, and he's in Mathura. Then he goes Balram also. Then he fulfills his promise, and then he marries all the gopis. But so two reasons. Well, then he appears in Kali Yuga. He appears as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, which is in the form of a sannyasi and a devotee. In the form of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, he appeared in Bengal 500 years ago, and he propagated the congregational chanting of holy names. Now, the reason why he came is that two reasons. One is Krishna spoke Bhagavad Gita, which is theoretical. A good teacher not only gives but practically shows how to do. Like if I want to tell my son, well, how you should broom or sweep, right? I can tell theoretically, but there's only so much he can get. But if I practically show it, then he will know how to do it. Similarly, Krishna is theoretically telling Bhagavad Gita, but then he comes practically as a devotee to show how to practice it. That's Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. But then he also comes, that's external reason. I mean, that's one reason. It's also, you can say, internal reason. But the real reason he comes is that he wanted to experience what is in it, what is there in me that the gopis love me so much, right? Devotees love me so much. What is it? I want to taste it. And so he comes as a devotee. And then when he comes as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, doesn't declare himself that he's Krishna himself. So that is one reason he comes. And also, he says that the gopis, they gave up their household life. They used to, just to, serve Krishna, they had severed all their relationships with their family members. And Krishna says that, you have done so many sacrifices in your love and devotion to me, I cannot repay it. And so when I come as a devotee, just like you gave up your family, all other considerations, service me, the only way I can do justice is I have to give up, sever my family relationships. And so for that reason, though he knew he's going to take sannyas, he appeared as Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and then his consort, Lakshmi, Rukmini, they appeared as his wives. And, shortly after the marriage, he takes up sannyas. So somebody might question, why did Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, gave up his young wife and old mother? But that's a promise that he had given to the gopis, that, just like you gave up your family relationships, when I come as a devotee, I also want to experience that, and that's the only way I can, begin to appreciate your love and devotion to me. So that is the reason Chaitanya Mahaprabhu takes sannyas at an early age. Okay, with that, I think we're already up time, and we can take a break, continue in the next class from verse number 16. Does anyone have any final questions, comments before we?
Okay.
No questions, no comments? Okay. Well, if you have, you can bring it up in our next class. So we'll end it over here. Thank you, everybody. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Thank you.
Hare Krishna.